Well, hello and welcome to CDO Magazine's interview series. My name is Clyde Gillard from HPE. I'm the AI go-to-market leader for North America. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Arvind Balasundaram, Executive Director, Commercial Insights and Analytics at Regeneron Pharmaceuticals. I
Sure.
want to bring a quote that I saw recently from IDC. It came out and it said, and it came out from, I think, March of this year, so it's fairly recent. Only 12% of AI pilots actually make it to production. 88% don't, according to IDC. And, they give a number of reasons for this, time for productivity, constraints on data access. We've kind of talked about some of those challenges, right? And then data governance, of course, but scaling and scaling a pilot into production. And you talked about infrastructure a little bit. And of course, at HPE, we have cloud solutions, we have infrastructure solutions. But I'm curious, from your point of view, how do you view getting your infrastructure ready? Because there's a big difference between creating a pilot with a couple servers and GPUs and a couple developers, and then launching that to now where you're talking 10,000 users an hour or a minute. So how do you make that leap, or what comments can you make about going from pilot into production? Because that seems to be a struggle that many organizations have.
Yeah, I think, the way I'll sum it up, Clyde, is I think the reason a lot of companies are in, what we call pilotitis, which is becoming given I work in healthcare, I'm licensed to use that, right? Is I think there's two reasons, right? One is the tail's wagging the dog, right? So you've got this, new toy syndrome where, people want to kind of do something because that's the thing everybody else is doing. That would be a mistake, right? So I think it's very important, even in a use case, to be very clear why you're doing it and how it fits with your overarching business strategy, right? Because if it is not part of the business strategy, it is not integrated into a business plan, it is not going to get the buy-in that you need for it to be productionalized, number one, right? And the use case has to have elements that are unique to the particular use, but it also has to address elements of scalability, right? So because somebody who's sitting, let's say, a CFO, is not only going to look at, let's say, one brand application, but is going to look for enterprise scaling, right? So you've got to have, I think, these dimensions baked into the arguments that one makes when developing a use case, which I don't think happens often enough, right? Mm-hmm. And the second thing I want to come back to, which I briefly alluded to, is a metrics and measurement piece. Obviously you need the governance and the data quality. I'm not going to get into that to any great degree, but you do need some way to measure what you're doing, right? And if you don't do some kind of A/B testing, if you're not comparing it to the ways you would do it traditionally, there is no real financial basis to justify an investment because there is no marker of value, right? You may get an answer, much quicker. You may have an insight that feels like it's different, but if it is not delivering decision impact, if it is not delivering something quicker, if it is not engaging the end user in a much more involved fashion, it is really not hitting the mark, right? So I think where I would go to your question is, I think people need to really put more time into the use case as if it were already in production. Mm-hmm. They need to start with the dog and get to the tail instead of the other way around, right? And we try to approach it that way. And I would tell you, the conversation is much, much more involved. It's much, much more, got cross partners, cross-functional involvement. And I think you get to a better place because by the time it goes into a use case, you kind of thought about everything that prevents you from scaling it, right? And it's also easy to justify it in the C-suite.
Yeah, somewhere there's a metaphor with the dog and the tail and fleas, and I don't know. I'm going to have to work on that one. But so what I like about where you brought me to now, it's let's say you get it right. Let's talk about results. AI really has become a driver or a disruptor when it comes to driving insights, to your title actually. And I've seen you quoted talking about the shift to a more immersive knowledge on the go, I think you called it, which I thought was kind of cool, type of analytics. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about that concept, knowledge on the go. What does it mean? And how can companies get more, especially from the volumes of data that they have, the data modalities that are out there? Talk about this knowledge on the go. I want to explore that a little bit more.
Yeah. So the analogy I go to is, all of us at some point have driven a car. And I say at some point because I live in New York City and don't own a car. So, I'm covering all of us. But, every one of us, first of all, has to know where we're going before we get in the car. It never used to be that. We used to just get in a car and go wherever we thought we were going. That's no longer the way things work, right? So that's exactly how analytics has become, right? So everyone now comes into analytics with a much clearer idea of what I think they're going to get. Now, when I say analytics has become immersive, what I'm talking about is it's almost like gaming, right? Because now what you have is you have tools and technologies that are natural language based, right? So I could be somebody who has no idea of, multivariate statistics or machine learning. I just need to know what question I'm asking. And, because of AI and some of these tools that are there, you can now get the answer not only in numeric outputs and graphs, but in natural language, right? So when you have that kind of a relationship with your analytics and data, it becomes a much greater degree of involvement on the part of the end user. They're much more vested, not only in the answer they get, but also how that line of querying actually progresses. They're looking for things like usage context, right? Which before they would rely on an analytics person to get for them. There was the hassle of running to them. You don't know if they're on PTO. Do I need to wait like 3 days? It's become very much in the moment, right? So when I say knowledge on the go, I'm talking about an expectation of always on in terms of being successful on the business, always driving with your eyes through the windshield. Right. And that's a very different blend of information and wisdom than we had. Right. And I'm going to go on a limb and tell you in 5 years, dashboards will be pretty much extinct because the look back view is great. But that's like, before we had movies, the stills made a lot of sense. But now a movie is far more entertaining because I know what's going on between the stills. Mm-hmm. Right. So dashboard to me is like stills, right? And it becomes obsolete the minute it's generated because it happened yesterday. Businesses want to know, especially I would tell you after COVID, right? We've become very much more conscious of what's going to happen because we realized, I think all businesses did. We as individuals did. The unknown has staggering effects if we're not ready for it. And I think that's changed the psychology of data and analytics. And that's what I mean by knowledge on the go, right? So I think people who can look at data and look at information and interpret information and guide the organization in an always on forward mentality are going to be immensely successful. And that is what I mean when I say knowledge on the go.
So many thoughts start to come to my mind right now. And I kind of, some of your comments a few minutes ago about this checklist that you go through, right? I deal with an awful lot of organizations in multiple industries. So outside of pharmaceuticals, but banking and healthcare. And, when you have conversations, they all are looking to adopt AI. And there's 100 places that they can run AI in their business. But the question is, how do you prioritize that, right? And you had mentioned use cases. You mentioned this sort of checklist of things that you should go through. I ask because, so the question is, how do you approach prioritizing AI investment in projects? How do you view that? But I want to footnote that because in preparing for our conversation, I saw something from your organization that I don't often see, and that is you actually published a paper last year regarding the responsible use of AI. And it's a public paper, so we're not sharing anything that's, confidential or private. But that's a pretty substantial stake in the ground to say, here's our viewpoint, which is great. For those that are listening that are struggling with, well, I've got 15 AI projects. How do I prioritize them? I'm wondering if you have some suggestions, good advice, best practices. How did you come about generating this paper? And how do you assess and prioritize AI projects within your business?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I'm so happy you brought up the paper because I can't comment on the specific paper itself because I'm aware it's there, but I didn't author it. So, but it does not surprise me, right?
I'll
Because
send you a link.
as a business, as a business, we are very committed to patients, right? If it's not good for patients, we don't want to be in it, right? And that's true of AI, right? So I think it's absolutely right that you have to embrace certain principles and values that align with your organization as you embark on the pathway to AI. And most companies have done that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody really in the end wants, consumers to get hurt, patients to get hurt. But that said, getting to the meat of your question, right? When I talk to people about AI and what they're doing, the analogy I get reminded of all the time is career planning, right? Where, I've worked at different companies, we've done career planning, and I'm sure you'll relate to this as well, where, people come to you and say, hey, I think you know what career I need to have, right? And we all know that's often not the case, right? You kind of have to get there yourself. Right? People can help you, but you still have to get there yourself. And I think that's true in many ways of AI, right? And so what I like to tell people, and I think what AI forward companies have done is they've developed what's called an AI ambition. And what an AI ambition and this is a concept that Gartner put out, which I think works quite nicely by simplifying the idea without getting into the bowels of the complexities behind it. But essentially, it divvies up AI into three pieces, right? And says there are three different types of AI available today. On the left side is what I would call everyday AI, right? This is your chat GPT, your report summarization. These are tasks that are not going to change the game, but they are going to add significant relief to your bottom line. They're primarily relievers of your bottom line. And in most cases, they make sense, right? So you want something in your AI ambition for your enterprise to really be going at everyday AI because it's already here. It's been vetted. It works wonderfully well. If you're not there, you're either not trusting it, even though we made a lot of progress in some of those dimensions, or you're scared about it, right? And so that is the easy part. The one on the right is the hardest part, right? And that is what I would call game-changing AI. These are elements of AI that are fundamentally different in terms of how you would run your business. And they will only be successful if other processes and pieces of your business also change if you were to bring this in. An example of that I often cite, and it's in the public domain, so I'm happy to mention it, is synthetic data. Synthetic data is a game-changing idea in many industries right now, including cybersecurity, financials. It's kind of like blockchain, where many of these industries cannot access, including ours, cannot access a situation where you have privacy, right? And ours in particular, because we're governed by HIPAA, right? So you can imagine a situation where, any one of us goes into, let's say, God forbid, we broke a bone, we go into a scanning situation, it's scanned, the record now has private information. Now, obviously, in order for this to go anywhere with synthetic data, it would still need to be blessed by the appropriate legal and compliance folks in my shop, in healthcare and all of that. But synthetic data and AI does allow you a way in which you can go beyond what we call pseudonymized or anonymized data, right? It just like you generate new text using ChatGPT, you can take data and you can generate absolutely new data that has nothing to do with the original data set, but retains kind of the context and the relationships on that source data set. That almost would give you a way in which you can examine some of these interrelationships without compromising privacy. Again, subject to the appropriate folks saying it's okay to do it, right? Because we're still waiting on GDPR guidance on whether this passes all the tests of being able to identify anybody, right? None of us wants that. So that's a game-changing piece. So you want some measure of, at least looking at it. AI forward companies obviously want to be ready when compliance and legal and the environment becomes favorable to do it, because these are significant enablers of the top line. These fundamentally change the way your information is delivered, the quality of insight, the actions you can take on it. It's immense, right? So that I would put on that right side. And in the middle, you have things that are kind of neither here nor there, right? And that's an example of query tools, right? So anything that makes analytics immersive, if somebody can ask a question that is in plain text and get back something in plain text, that's a generative engine. That could potentially get you top line. It won't change your game, but the decision could come back in a far faster way. Next best action measurement is another one where you can do it, in a real-time manner, and you could be in the moment competing better as an entity than you would without it. So you want as an organization to have some ambition in these three areas. It could all be on the left.
Yeah.
But where I'm going is you have to have clarity and you have to take your leadership through what that ambition is. Because if you don't know where you're going, you're just going, right? That's like getting into a car and following the road without knowing where you're going, right? None of us wants to do that.
You brought us back to the car. That was good.
Yeah. And I don't even own one. So, it's a miracle. I use that analogy all the time. So,
yeah, I mean, I kind of put those into two categories when I talk to customers too. Basically, AI, you can do what you're doing now better, or you can change the game and create something brand new, is sort of how the two camps that I put it together. And
yeah.
Arvind, let me thank you for joining me today. I feel like we could talk for another hour, but fascinating topics. I very much appreciate it. And for our listeners, for more interview information and insights, please visit cdomagazine.tech. Thank you.
Clyde, thank you very much. And again, thanks to CDO Magazine. I hope to see you in New York, where we will use guarded optimism to cross up streets. Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Thank you.